Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you are joining us and a second time, if you were with us in the morning, thank you for coming back. And if you're joining us for the first time, it's so good to have you with us. I am looking forward to this afternoon, and I hope that what we're going to be talking about, learning when to detach and when to engage, you are going to be able to apply to your professional life, but also hopefully to your personal life. So I'm excited to dig into this topic together. We will be doing some polling questions again, and I will be stopping for some Q&A. So please feel free to, if something strikes you, to type your question into the chat box, and then Christopher will read those to me when we stop for a Q&A break. But this morning, one of the things we talked about was just the abundance of change and uncertainty that we have been facing this year, and how that leads us to feel anxious, and that is a normal response to change and uncertainty. The other thing that we have had an abundance of this year is other people's opinions, right? People have an opinion about everything right now. People have an opinion about COVID. People have an opinion about masks. People have an opinion about the government. People have an opinion about school. There is nothing that I can think of that has not turned into a very opinionated hot topic for discussion, it seems like. And so everybody has an opinion about something right now. And as we have seen, especially I feel like over this past year, people are sharing those opinions loudly and passionately and freely. It's good for us to have opinions. One of the things that I sometimes work with in my work with clients is that they don't have that much of an opinion. They don't voice that opinion. So we want them to have opinions and voice those opinions. So it's good to have opinions. There's nothing wrong with that in of itself. But I think what can be hard about opinions and other people's opinions is that oftentimes opinions are criticism, or rather we hear other people's opinions as criticism. And being on the receiving end of these opinions of criticism can really wear you down, and it can decrease your enjoyment of your job, of a certain relationship, of a hobby. Just being on the receiving end of criticism can really just decrease your level of satisfaction. You can start to feel like, well, geez, no good deed goes unpunished. You can feel unappreciated. You can feel undervalued. You can feel discouraged that there's just no pleasing people. Everybody's going to find something to nitpick at, right? We've all been there in various different situations in our lives. And being on the receiving end can also impact what you do. It can impact what you say, how freely you speak, how freely you share your opinions, and it can impact how you lead. So, for example, we're going to really talk about this a lot. If you are really averse to receiving criticism, then you are going to avoid ever trying anything new. You're just going to stick with the same old, because you know it's proven and you know the outcome. You're going to avoid taking risk. You're going to avoid hard conversations that might make someone feel uncomfortable. You're going to avoid confronting bad behavior. And yes, bad behavior does exist in the workplace. And you're going to struggle to set boundaries and really lead when tough decisions have to be made because you are so afraid of criticism. Learning to deal with criticism is an important skill for anyone, because if you are pleasing everyone, then you are not being true to yourself. It is impossible to please everyone. And if you're trying to please everyone, then you will definitely eventually burn out. So in other words, keeping everyone happy and liking you, if that is your MO in life, that is going to eventually cause you a lot of distress and pain in your personal and in your professional life. So whether personally or professionally, we have to learn to detach from criticism so that we can engage in the important things, in the hard things, of life. And so it begs the question, this is our big question for this afternoon. How do we do that? How do we detach from criticism if we are in a role or in a field or in a relationship or a profession in which there is often a lot of criticism? How do you not let that criticism and, on the opposite side of that coin, the desire for approval, to be liked, validation, how do you not let all of that interfere with your work, with your enjoyment of your work, with your sense of purpose? But more specifically, how do we detach from criticism so that we can do our job and yet remain engaged and invested? Because what we don't want to happen, we don't want to become detached and then walled off. So we want to learn how to detach so that then we can healthily engage. And so that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to start off on a high level and look at the power of approval and criticism. Why do these things have such power in our lives? We're then going to dive into this really important concept called differentiation. We're going to look at some tangible, concrete things we can do to detach from criticism and approval seeking. And then we are going to outline what engaged leadership looks like. So let's go for our first poll question, and I'll let Christopher read that out for us. How well do you handle criticism?
Okay, and I'll read this for you guys, especially if you cannot see it. And if you're new to this session, the poll question, there should be like a little man with a number of people here, and then there's the chat box, and right next to it, there's a square and a circle with a triangle on top. That's how you get to the polls. I'm sorry that it's not easier. How well do you handle criticism? The first choice is I love all feedback. One says it sends me spiraling. People answer if that's you, because that does, it sends some of us spiraling. I take it with a grain of salt. And then to laugh, I put all of the above, but which of course nobody should be choosing all of the above, but so far it's winning, maybe. So I don't even know. The joke is on, they know I like to joke, so they're throwing the joke back on me. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, but I'm glad you put that. I'm glad you added that, because that really is true. Each situation with criticism, we respond differently, and with some, we probably do take it with a grain of salt. With others, it sends us to bed for a week, and with others, we just love the feedback. So.
And it is funny as you say that in the chat box. Some people are going to tell you what some of the people have said. Okay. Several people said it depends on the source of the criticism. Yeah. And that's true. Like I know, like criticism from my mother, for example, is different than criticism from my colleagues, different from my friends. So yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. So yeah, so I meant it as a funny, but it worked out for us. So I'm going to show the results. We've got 78 out of 100 and something. So so I love all feedback is 7, and I will just, if any of you know me, this is not me at all. It sends me spiraling, and that is depending on, as you all said, who it is. I definitely feel that sometimes, but also sometimes depending on who it is, I do take it with a grain of salt. And so we had 29 people say all of the above, 28 grain of salt, 16 spiraling, and then 7. And I have a hard time believing, if these people are honest with themselves, that they love all feedback, except maybe Brenda Poku, because she probably does love all feedback because she's just amazing that way. But yeah, let's talk about this. This is an interesting topic.
All right. Very good. I love that. I love the diversity of answers within our group. So there are a few things in life that can keep us from our goals, from fulfilling our vision for our life, that can lead us to ineffective leadership, like running after approval and running from criticism. Our relationship with these two things, which are just kind of opposite sides of the same coin, can really impact our lives. It can impact how we feel. It can impact our mindset, our relationships. And again, it can impact our leadership ability. They can have amazing power over our lives if we're not fully aware of how they're functioning in our lives. So let's look at praise and approval first off. And like I said, we're going to start high and drill down. why are praise and approval so important to us in the first place? And why is criticism so dreaded? So first of all, we tend to seek praise and approval over things or regarding things that we want to be true about ourselves, but we don't quite believe are true about ourselves. So we love to receive praise. We chase after praise and approval on things that we want to be true about ourselves, but we don't fully believe that it's true about us. So for example, if we want to be seen as someone who knows a lot, who is very resourceful, who can always solve the problem or give you the answer, then we're going to work really hard to have all the answers, right? We're going to work really hard to gather all the information. We're going to work really hard to try to fix everybody's problem for us or for them so that they will praise us for, gosh, you always know the answer. Gosh, you always know where to point me, right? If you want to be seen as someone who is very giving, who is very generous, who is a helper, then you are always going to go the extra mile. And going the extra mile will get you the validation that you are looking for, consciously or subconsciously, about your actions. We seek the praise and validation as a way of filling our picture. And again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be acknowledged for a job well done. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't believe these things already about yourself, then you can hear it 1,000 times and it's not going to stick. So if you don't believe I am a competent, capable person who is knowledgeable, who is intelligent, then you can fix 1,000 problems and you can have 4,000 answers to 5,000 questions, and you're still going to wrestle with that doubt no matter how many times somebody says, gosh, you just always know how to come in and solve the situation. So I hope that's making sense what I'm saying, that if you don't quite believe it about yourself, it doesn't matter how many times somebody says it to you, it's not going to fully stick. On the other hand, we dread criticism for a number of reasons. Depending on our background, on our context, we may internalize criticism as someone not liking us, rejecting us. And this is particularly hard if you were raised in an environment where you were really socialized to be accommodating, to be people pleasing, to be a people pleaser. You know, that was really elevated as a good thing in your family growing up. And so criticism feels like rejection. Criticism feels like someone doesn't like you, you know. Let's say you fix dinner for somebody and they're like, it was okay. It wasn't my favorite. It was okay. Oh, it's just gonna, like, you know, dagger to the heart. Or we may internalize criticism as weakness. If I were strong, if I were competent, if I were powerful, then I wouldn't have been criticized. So clearly the criticism is indicative of weakness on my part. Criticism can feel like failure. So we all register criticism in different ways, given our context, our background, et cetera, et cetera. But we can get caught in this pattern of striving for approval to fill ourselves up and running from criticism to protect ourselves. And the result is we get caught in this emotional roller coaster, and we end up giving other people a lot of power in our lives, because that person that we're desperately wanting that approval and validation from, they have all the power in our lives. We are turning over the power on how we feel about ourselves, about our sense of worth, to that person, and whether or not they're going to say, "Atta girl, atta boy, job well done." On the other side of the coin, we're turning over all of our power to that person who may criticize us. We are letting them determine if we feel like a failure, if we feel rejected. We are turning over the keys to the car, so to speak, to these other people. So that's why we want to be really aware of what type of relationship do I have with approval seeking and with criticism. Am I unknowingly turning over power to other people in my life? So then, here's the big question. How do we detach from approval seeking and our fear of criticism. So there are several ways that we can look at this question. There's several ways that we can answer it. And like I said, I do have some concrete things that we're going to talk about in just a few minutes. But the big concept that I wanted to unpack first, because I think it is so important to this discussion, it's also very important to this discussion around engagement and what does it look like to be an engaged leader, is differentiation. We have to become differentiated. So let's talk about differentiation. Differentiation is the process of becoming your true self, your authentic self, by not letting other things, other people determine your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, or how you feel about yourself. So this is how I like to demonstrate this. For a lot of us, we have been raised, we believe that this is a good relationship, that this, I'm going to step out of the workplace mindset for just a second. So just hang in there with me, that this is a good relationship, that this is love, that this is friendship, that this is a romantic relationship, that a good relationship, a loving relationship, a liking relationship is one in which we are so connected that you can't see where I end and you begin. But this is not an example of a healthy relationship. This is an example of enmeshment. Enmeshment is when it's hard to see where you end and I begin. This is an example of a healthy relationship. I have my own thoughts, feelings, opinions, beliefs, values, ways that I live my life, and you have your own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, opinions, ways that you live your life. And how you feel about me does not impact how I feel about myself. And how I feel about you does not impact how you feel about yourself. And so we are two full and complete separate beings who are connected. And this is what health looks like in a relationship. This is what differentiation looks like. I can be me and you can be you, and we can still be connected. We can still work together. We can still collaborate with one another. But I don't have to sacrifice my values, my opinions, my thoughts, my feelings for you, and you don't have to do that for me. We can be separate, but still connected. It's clear where each of us ends, so to speak. It's clear where your opinion ends and mine begins. Another way of looking at this is you can spin and spin on an issue. You can be very stressed about something, but I don't have to get in that tornado with you, right? I don't have to get anxious with you. I don't have to get torn up with you. I don't have to get upset with you. Now, I can give you empathy. I can say, oh, I can see how that's really upsetting. I'm really sorry all that's happening. But I don't have to get in the pit with you. Does that make sense? I'm hoping y'all are nodding. In my mind, you're nodding. So that is what differentiation looks like. We can have our own feelings and we don't have to catch those feelings from one another. We become differentiated when we have self-awareness, when we have good boundaries, and when we have a strong sense of our values. And what I mean by values in this case is what motivates us, what our life is about. When we aren't differentiated, what does that look like? When we aren't differentiated, we avoid criticism. Criticism is frightening because what you think about me is determining how I feel about myself. We avoid rejection. We avoid judgment at all costs, and we chase after approval and validation because we are allowing those things on the outside, the external, to distract from our sense of worth. We are letting those external things like approval, like evaluations at work determine our worth when we are not differentiated. When we're not differentiated, we can end up feeling like we are not enough, like we're never doing enough, because we are looking outside for these outside things to tell us about ourselves, to tell us we are worthy, we are good enough. So, for example, so I'm going to people please. to keep you happy. I'm going to try to mind read so I can anticipate your feelings and needs, and then you'll like me. I'm going to walk into every room and kind of take the temperature of the room and calibrate myself accordingly so you'll like me. I'm going to avoid conflict and hard conversations, even when they're needed, because I don't want to make anybody mad. I'm going to try to be who I think you want me to be so that you will like me and approve of me, even if it stresses me out, even if I don't enjoy it. I'm never going to set boundaries, and I'm always going to say yes, even when I need to say no. That is what it looks like to lead an undifferentiated life. We end up tap dancing for approval. We crave that validation because we're struggling to feel it within ourselves. So this takes us to so we're going to now bring this back to leadership in the workplace. You let me get a little personal there for a minute. Thanks. The therapist in me thanks you. So here's our next poll question. A lack of differentiation inhibits leadership, courage, and risk-taking. True or false?
And while you guys are answering the poll question, I have to just butt in and say this differentiation topic, and I probably should have known about it. It just shows I probably don't read enough. But when Mazi first really discussed this, it was like eye-opening to me. And I want to think and I hope that I have formed a relationship with Assistant State Librarian Wendy Cornelison because of this lecture or presentation from Mazi, to where she's still very cautious of my feelings, but we're honest with each other and we give each other feedback that helps each other. And I feel like I've grown as a person and a librarian even because of her feedback that I've been willing to listen to, and I give her feedback. And so when you're able to give each other feedback without getting your feelings, and sometimes you honestly will get your feelings hurt, that's okay too, because you know that the place that the person coming from is from a place of positivity and they're helping you. So it's such a helpful thing. And so I think it looks like people are listening, Mazi, because we've got 70 true votes and 2 false votes. So I think the answer on this is true.
Yes, very good. And I appreciate you sharing what you shared, because yes, if we want to get to the place where we can receive feedback, we have to become differentiated. And we're going to talk more about that in just a second, because we have to get to the place where I can hear your words and it's not a measure or a marker or an evaluation of my worth. When we start to feel that someone's words are an evaluation of our worth, that's when we shut down. That's when we become defensive, and we can't collaborate. We can't lead. We can't work together. I so appreciate you sharing that. That was perfect. Perfect. So yes, a lack of differentiation inhibits leadership, courage, and risk-taking. That is most definitely true. When we are not differentiated, we can feel trapped and constrained by our relationships and other people's opinions. And this really inhibits us personally and professionally. For example, we can end up catching other people's emotions rather than feeling our own feelings. And you can really see this in teams and at the workplace. You know, anxiety and anger are really contagious. And so if you have a very anxious leader, if you have an angry leader, that sets the tone for that team. Other people are going to catch those emotions if everyone is not differentiated and taking responsibility for their own being, if you will. So that is just another example of what it means to not be differentiated. If we're not differentiated, we avoid doing things we want to do or need to do because we're afraid of what others will think. But more specifically, to dig into how does differentiation cause problems for us professionally? Our confidence and our self-worth, our emotions, can rise and fall on the latest evaluation, on the latest feedback, whether or not anyone complimented your presentation, what people think of you, what accolades you're receiving. This most definitely decreases our job satisfaction, our role satisfaction. We end up, as I said earlier, riding this roller coaster of emotion because we don't have a good, secure hold on our own self-worth. We are hanging our self-worth on other people's words, on other people's actions. And again, we're turning over a lot of power to them. A lack of differentiation kills vulnerability. We're going to talk about vulnerability a little bit more in a second, but it kills vulnerability, it kills courage and risk-taking, because if we're not differentiated, we are too afraid of making a mistake to try anything new. We're too afraid of getting it wrong, of disappointing someone, of making someone mad. So we are less likely to try new things. We're less likely to be innovative. And as we all know, regardless of the field you're in, innovation is necessary. And we've all really been thrust into innovation over this past year because of COVID. Leaders who are not differentiated will struggle to give necessary feedback to their teams because, again, they don't want to make anybody mad. They want to avoid conflict. They want to avoid uncomfortable conversations. The classic example of this aspect of undifferentiation that I think of is Michael Scott on The Office. If you remember, like in the first season, first couple of seasons, there was always the kind of running storyline of, was the branch going to close? And Michael just wanted to avoid that. And then there's the one episode where they have to choose a new health insurance plan, if you remember that. And Michael didn't want to do that because he didn't want to make anybody mad. And he wanted to be the popular boss and the world's best boss and everybody's best friend. And so he didn't want to choose the health insurance plan because he didn't want to make anybody mad. So he gives it to Dwight. It gives the job to Dwight. But anyways, Michael Scott is a great example of a leader who's not differentiated. On the contrast, differentiated individuals, they are comfortable with conflict. They don't necessarily relish conflict. They're not the type of person who just loves a challenge and loves to get in there and debate and perhaps sometimes can be a little overbearing. They are comfortable with conflict because the conflict isn't determining their sense of identity or their sense of worth. Undifferentiated leaders may sacrifice their values by staying silent about important things because they are so hungry for approval and to be liked that it's easier to hide things. It's easier to keep secrets to protect their image or the image of the organization. You can see how this might play out with companies that we see that had been hiding information about their true financial health or what have you. Undifferentiated team members also stay silent. They stay silent in meetings because they're afraid to disagree or afraid someone will think their opinion is off base. And so we don't have a free-flowing sharing of ideas if we have team members that aren't differentiated. So differentiation is a really important topic in the workplace because if we are not differentiated, then we have kind of this thin, false piece that we live with in the workplace. And we don't get to that place of innovation and really collaborating well together. So, how do we become differentiated? How do we do that so that praise and criticism are not impeding our ability to lead, to live, and to work with others? Normally, or usually, when somebody hears that question, how do I get to the place where I'm not letting other people's opinion matter to me? A lot of people will answer, well, you just have to get where you don't care what people think. Like, that's the solution. You just, I don't care what people think. They can do whatever, they can think whatever. So let me ask you this. This is our next poll question. Differentiation means not caring what other people think. True or false?
Mazi, I don't have anything wise to add this time. So.
Okay.
We're having some great discussion. I love as I said last time, it's nice to have this format so Mazi doesn't get interrupted by your discussion, but you're all having some great discussion forwarding what she's saying in the chat box. I really do love seeing that. Okay, so I think, once again, I think people are listening. Differentiation, I struggle even saying that. Differentiation means not caring what other people think. 4 people said true and 80 said false. So I think most people are getting that one.
Yes, very good. So yes, it is false. Adopting the attitude of, I don't care what people think of me, I'm doing me, is not our goal. That's not our destination here. I love this quote from Brene Brown. She says, when we stop caring about what people think, we lose our capacity for connection. When we become defined by what people think, we lose our willingness to be vulnerable. If we dismiss all the criticism, we lose out on important feedback. But if we subject ourselves to the hatefulness, our spirits get crushed. It's a tightrope. Shame resilience is the balance bar, and the safety net below is the 1 or 2 people in our lives who can help us reality check the criticism and the cynicism. So, not caring what people think, having that mindset, that posture, is actually armor. And when we armor up in that way, it's hard to partner with us. It's hard to lead us. It's hard to work with us. It's hard to live with us when we are armored up, because we become like porcupines, right? And we just pop out those quills anytime that we feel threatened. When we don't care what anybody thinks, there's no room for receiving feedback. There's no room for being curious about other people's thoughts, about other people's feelings, context, opinions. So being differentiated doesn't mean disengaging from the relationship, because when you take that posture, I don't care what anybody thinks, that's really what that is. That's disengaging from connection. So differentiation is not disengaging from the relationship, from the team. You are still invested, but your worth is no longer a bargaining chip, if you will. In fact, when we are differentiated, we are able to more fully and healthily engage as leaders, because our ego and our worth are no longer on the line. So the goal is to detach our sense of self-worth from criticism and praise, and to know whose opinion really matters in our life, personally or professionally. So we're going to now dig more into that statement right there. And what does that actually look like? How can you play that out in your life? But I just wanted to pause for a second. And Christopher, are there any questions in the chat box?
Hey, sorry, I was admitting someone.
Oh, no, you're fine.
There's some good discussion, but we don't have any questions as of right now. So these librarians and business folks, they know what's going on. So they are having great discussion.
Okay, great. So strategies for detachment. I'm going to give you a handful of things to think about and to apply to your life and to your leadership. The first, and these first 2 things actually coincide with some things we were discussing this morning regarding our anxiety. We want to learn to identify and regulate our emotions. You want to be able to have a different emotional reaction than those around you. That is a mark of detachment, a mark of differentiation, so that you don't get pulled into the chaos, so that you don't get pulled into the conflict, into someone else's anxiety. You can hold on to you regardless of what others might be doing or throwing at you. And I imagine this is really important when it comes to dealing with customers, with the individuals who come into the library, because again, I'm sure y'all deal with a lot of criticism. I'm sure everybody's got an opinion on how the library could be set up, or what y'all are offering, or the masks, or this or that. And so being able to stay grounded in yourself in the face of that criticism when dealing with the public is just really, really important. A huge part of differentiation is separating how you are feeling and how you feel about yourself from what is happening around you. So to do this, we have to become more emotionally aware. So this goes back to what we were talking about this morning. And so we have to tune into and identify, how am I feeling about this criticism or this feedback? Am I sad? Am I disappointed? Am I afraid that this feedback could jeopardize something that's important to me? Am I mad? Am I feeling insecure? Am I feeling exposed, if you will? And then we want to identify how we might be offloading that emotion. How we might be offloading that emotion, and what are some more productive ways that we could respond. Because what can often happen is this: we're meeting with someone, we're meeting with a supervisor, we're meeting with a team member, or we're having an interaction with someone in the library. They give us some feedback that maybe we don't agree with, that we don't like, and we have an emotional reaction. We get sad, we get mad, whatever the emotional reaction is. If we're not emotionally aware, then we're going to offload. And when we offload our emotion, that's when we have an unproductive response. And I'm going to share some specific examples of what offloading looks like, but we might become defensive, or we might get angry. And then the conversation takes a turn that just is, again, not productive and doesn't take us anywhere good. If we have emotional awareness, then we can stop, we can pause. Before we begin to offload, we can register, okay, I'm feeling a little annoyed by what this person is saying. Okay, I've acknowledged that. Now let me take the next step. And I'm going to get to what the next step is, but I'm not going to give it away just the second. So offloading emotion, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here for a second, because I think this can be really helpful. And during COVID, we've been offloading a lot of emotions. So I think it's just a helpful concept in general to understand right now. But offloading our feelings leads to unproductive reactions. Offloading our feelings is the easy way, if you will, to handle large or small adversity, but it's not the productive way. So it feels better to just snap at somebody, right? It feels better to become defensive and to point out, well, what they aren't doing or what they did, because you're frustrated, but it's not productive. And it doesn't create a safe working environment, if you will. Brene Brown, in her book Rising Strong, and again in her book Dare to Lead, talks about the different ways that we can offload emotions. And she gives several different examples of this. I wanted to just share a couple. One is called chandeliering. I like to think of it as exploding. That's kind of the term that I use. So chandeliering or exploding is when we stuff our feelings for days, for weeks, for months, maybe even years. We stuff our feelings, and then the slightest thing can happen and we just explode. You know, if you were with us in this morning, I talked about the example of somebody leaving a glass on the counter. You know, we have stuffed our anxiety, we have stuffed our sadness, we have stuffed our anger, and somebody then leaves that glass on that counter after you've cleared that counter off, and you just explode. And so that's an example of chandeliering, of exploding. Chandeliering, exploding, often happens in one-up relationships. So the person who is one-up often is the one who loses it. So a good example of this would be in parenting. Parents can often chandelier, can often explode over a small thing after they have stuffed and stuffed and stuffed. The danger with chandeliering, with exploding, is that it creates a walking on eggshells environment. You never know what's going to set the person off. And so you never feel like you can kind of relax and fully engage with the person, because there isn't a lot of trust and security in the relationship, in the environment. Another way that we can offload emotion is called bouncing hurt. And bouncing hurt is when we kick the feeling, the hurt feeling, out of our system with anger, with blame, or avoidance. So, we're feeling anxious about something, we're feeling concerned about something, we feel hurt by something, and so we get angry. It's easier to get angry at somebody than to admit that we're hurt. We blame them, we lash out, we make excuses, we deflect from self in some sort of way. Avoidance, we act like we're not bothered, we don't care. Oh, it's fine. No, I'm fine. No, whatever. I don't care. Whatever, right? We use humor, we use sarcasm, we use apathy as a way to avoid. This bouncing hurt is a major form of self-protection. It is a thick wall that we build around ourselves to protect ourselves when we are feeling something that feels uncomfortable. Other ways that we offload would be numbing. We've talked a little bit about numbing this morning. Stockpiling. Stockpiling is also kind of similar to chandeliering, but there are some differences. Stockpiling is when we stuff all of our feelings, and then eventually our feelings start coming out in physical ways: headaches, insomnia, racing heart, high blood pressure, panic attacks, digestion issues. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that emotion always comes out. And so you get to choose, is it going to come out in a productive way, or is it going to come out in an unproductive way? The danger with offloading hurt, particularly in regards to our relationships, the danger with offloading hurt is that it disconnects us from others. It's very hard to work with someone, to be connected to someone who is always offloading, right? It disconnects us from ourselves because we just offload the emotion. We don't develop any sort of emotional self-awareness or the ability to regulate our emotions. And the third thing, it becomes what we're known for. It becomes our identity. You know, if you're always the person who blames others, who never takes responsibility, you know, you get known for that. If you're the person who loses it, you become known for that. So when we are working on detaching, we want to learn to slow down our immediate reaction when somebody's giving us feedback that we like or don't like. We want to take that pause, and we want to recognize, ooh, I'm wanting to offload. I'm wanting to become defensive. I'm wanting to withdraw. I'm wanting to attack. But instead, I'm going to identify how I'm feeling, and then I'm going to choose how I respond to this situation. The second thing, we want to get clear on what is going on externally and internally. Once you've identified how you're feeling, what this feedback, what this criticism has triggered within you, you want to use the tool that we talked about this morning, which is, what is the story I'm telling myself? What is the story I'm telling myself right now about this feedback, about this person, about this criticism? This question helps us get to what we are thinking and what we're telling ourselves. And once we've identified that story, then we want to get clear on what's really going on. So we want to practice curiosity about the situation and the person. All right, let me learn more about what this person is really wanting right now. They're criticizing the way that we're handling this, but what is it they're really wanting? You can identify where maybe you are personalizing, you're taking personally their behavior. We have to remember that people don't do things to us, they do things for themselves. That's just a really helpful adage when it comes to working with people. You know, if somebody cuts you off on the road, they have not been waiting for you all day, in their car, and they saw your car coming. They're like, yeah, this is my opportunity. I'm going to cut her off. I've been waiting for her all day. No, they cut you off because they're trying to make the red light, or they're late, or they're not paying attention. People don't do things to us. They do things for themselves. And so, beginning to identify, where am I personalizing? Where am I assuming I know the other person's intent? Where am I trying to mind read what I think this person is thinking, right? And then the other thing that we want to do with this getting clear on what's going on externally or internally is that we want to identify the lie from the truth. The lie is that we are what we did. And the truth is that feedback does not determine our worth as a person. So, someone doesn't like your presentation. Someone says that it was boring. Someone says that it didn't provide all of the necessary and relevant information. Does that determine your worth as a person? No. Now, might you feel disappointed? Sure. Might you feel sad? Sure. Might you feel angry? Absolutely. But we want to protect our self-worth from shame, because quite frankly, it is shame, from that shame coming in and trying to make the situation about your worth rather than about feedback. And again, this is getting a little therapy for us, but I'm going to trust y'all can hang in there with me. The way that I like to think of it is, imagine your self-worth is like a sunflower or a tree or something, whatever comes to mind for you. And so imagine your self-worth is this thing, and you build a fence. I think of it as a fence. You build a fence around this self-worth to protect this self-worth. Shame is like this glob of yuck that wants to come in and wants to make everything about your worth. Somebody criticizes you, you're not good enough. Somebody dislikes your presentation, you're not smart enough. Somebody says you left out some important information, you're not competent enough. Shame likes to taint everything. And so what we have to do is we have to keep shame at bay. Shame, you don't need to come in here and make this about worth. My worth is unchanging. My worth is unshakable. Now, can I feel sad about the feedback? Absolutely. But the sadness doesn't have to morph and get tainted into shame and feeling like I'm not good enough. I hope that makes sense, how I'm trying to describe that. So we want to be protective of that self-worth. The next thing, we want to learn to see feedback as neutral. We want to view feedback as words, not commentary on our personhood, not a declaration of who we are as a person. We often let feedback tell us if we're good or bad. Feedback doesn't tell us if we're good or bad. Feedback tells us if we're resonating with the audience. Feedback tells us about the audience's preferences, right? Because feedback is subjective. Right? And so it's important to see feedback as neutral. It's important to see feedback as, this is telling me about this person's preferences. It's not telling me about my personhood. And so beginning to separate those two things. Next, we want to lower our defenses and get curious about the feedback. This word curious, we talked about it this morning, and we're going to talk about it a couple more times today, but it's such an important word. It's such an important posture to take in our lives. We want to practice curiosity. We want to seek to understand more than we want to be understood. When somebody gives us feedback, that defensiveness kicks in and we want to explain ourselves. We want to be understood. We feel desperate to be understood. But when we detach, when we are differentiated, that part kind of settles down, if you will, and we can take that posture of, I'm going to seek to understand. I'm going to seek to understand where this person is coming from, because, subtext, I don't need to explain myself, because this isn't about my personhood. My personhood is not being attacked. So I'm going to seek to understand what this person is saying about my actions. We want to seek to understand more than to be understood. So we want to lower those defenses, practice curiosity. So what does curiosity sound like? Tell me more about that. I would like to understand a little bit more where you're coming from. That's it. That's all you have to say. I would like to understand a little bit more where you're coming from. Can you expand on that? That's the sentence stem. So, and then we want to take what's helpful, what's applicable, and we want to leave the rest. We want to use wisdom in who we seek feedback from. So know from whom to seek and receive feedback. Another Brenéism that I absolutely love, when she talks about detaching from criticism, and she says, draw a 1-inch by 1-inch box on a piece of paper. All the names that you can fit in that box, those are the people who can speak into your life. Those are the people whose opinions matter. Everybody else, they don't get a seat at the table. And I just love that visual of like, gosh, yes, not everybody's opinion can matter. Not everybody's opinion can carry the same amount of weight and influence in my life, or I will just drive myself right over a cliff. That 1-inch by 1-inch box, that visual of like, okay, whose opinion in my life matters? And then to go one level deeper and understand what it is that we're wanting from that person's opinion, that person's approval. So it's not an attitude of I don't care what people think. It's an attitude of I care what certain people think, and I have to let go of everybody else. So we want to know whose opinion counts. And then we want to ask ourselves these 3 questions about those people, about those people's opinions. The first question we want to ask is this: am I seeking their opinion, or am I seeking their approval? See, if we're not very self-aware, we are going to ask somebody their opinion, but really we're wanting their approval. And those are actually 2 different things. Sometimes we may ask someone for their opinion, and like I said, we're wanting their approval. And so we have to get honest with ourselves. All right, if I ask somebody what they think of this, what is it that I'm really wanting from them? And is that a healthy thing to want from this person? And am I going to get that from this person? The second question we want to ask ourselves, based on this person's experience, based on their knowledge, can they give me the feedback I need? Based on this person's experience, based on their knowledge, can they give me the feedback I need? So for example, let's say that you want to ask a close friend if you should make a job change. But you have to stop and you have to think, has this person ever made a similar career change? Or has this person been working in the same job for 44 years? Somebody who has been working in the same job for 44 years is probably not the right person to ask if you should make a significant job change. They have made that choice for a reason. And so that's their mindset. And so their mindset is, and their experience is not, or rather they don't have the experience that you need for what you are looking for, the information that you are looking for. The third question we want to ask is the person I'm asking healthy enough to give me feedback that is not filtered by their own baggage, by their own hangups, and their own insecurities? Is the person I'm asking healthy enough that their feedback is not filtered through their own baggage, hangups, and insecurities? So for example, you may want to ask a coworker if you should leave their department, but based on that coworker's context, whatever that should be, whatever that is, and being in that department, can that coworker give you unfiltered feedback? Does that make sense? So we want to know who we're going to seek feedback from. And then this is a big one. People are going to disagree with you. People are going to criticize you. And here's the hard truth, especially if you're an Enneagram 2, either your primary number or your wing. I don't know if we have any Enneagram folks out there. Not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to like you. And not everybody's going to like what you do. And that's a tough pill to swallow. That's a hard one to swallow. One of my favorite Oprah quotes, she says, if you're going to be courageous with your life, you are going to disappoint some people. Criticism, again, isn't a sign you are bad. It's a sign that somebody disagrees with your choices. But it's not a sign that you are bad. And again, that we have to separate how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our self-worth from the criticism. I wish we saw this similarly, but your disagreement doesn't mean there's something wrong with me, right? That's what we have to tell ourselves. So whether in your personal or professional life, if you sacrifice courage for likability, you will always eventually resent that choice. If you sacrifice courage for likability, you will eventually resent that choice. If you choose not to do something, or if you agree to do something to keep the peace, to keep things smooth, you will eventually resent that choice and that person. All right, we're getting to the end of how to detach here. Criticism that stings the most is the criticism you fear to be true about yourself. This is a big one that when I first started reading about this a while ago, I was like, whoa, well, that's heavy. Criticism that stings the most, the criticism that sticks to you, is usually connected to something you fear about yourself. It's usually connected to your inner critic. What is your inner critic saying? How does this feedback confirm, if you will, your inner critic? What is the origin of this self-critical belief? That's really digging deep and finding that freedom. Tara Moore, who's the author of a great book called Playing Big, says, once we know that the ouches of criticism are mostly not about the external event, but about our internal reality, we've got power. We can utilize painful experiences of criticism to discover the negative beliefs we hold about ourselves. We can turn our focus away from the other person, away from the incident, and look inside to see what beliefs we hold that made that criticism so wounding. It goes back to the story that we're telling ourselves, right? Because some criticism sticks and some criticism doesn't. And the criticism that sticks is connected to the old inaccurate story, right? So when we are dealing with criticism that we cannot shake, that we cannot seem to get off of us, we want to dig in and ask ourselves, where is that coming from? That is hitting on something old and it's hitting on something familiar. One of my favorite kind of just sayings is, if it's hysterical, it's historical. Isn't that good? If it's hysterical, it's historical. If you're having a strong reaction to something, it is linked to something in your past. It is touching on something that's familiar, that's a little tender. There's nothing new under the sun, y'all. If it's hysterical, it's historical. And our last one on how to detach from approval seeking and from criticism, identify what approval will give you. If you find that you are caught in this race of chasing after approval, chasing after validation, looking to others to always give you their opinion, looking to others to always give you the pat on the head, we have to dig in and ask ourselves, what am I thinking this approval is going to get me? What am I looking for from this person? What am I looking for from this approval? What will that person's approval mean to me? What will that person's approval mean about me? What is so significant if others think that I am fill in the blank? If you can identify the deeper meaning that you are looking for from approval, then you can begin to give it to yourself. Because ultimately, how we detach from approval seeking is that we begin to believe the positive thing about ourselves, and we give ourselves that approval. Again, it's not about not caring what other people think, but it is about starting from a place of belief that you are good at your job, you are competent, you are skilled. And then when you do receive approval or validation from someone, from an external source, that's kind of the cherry on top of the sundae. But that external approval and validation is not the entire ice cream sundae, right? You feel complete without hearing it from someone else because you are able to say to yourself, job well done. So getting more approval, more accolades, more promotions is not going to change unless we start believing, hey, I am good at this. Hey, I am enough. Hey, I am competent. If we don't start cultivating that belief, then external accolades are going to be like pouring water into a cracked pitcher. They're just going to keep seeping out. And criticism is going to keep pummeling us. So a great question to ask yourself based on the type of praise you seek is, what do I need to start believing about myself and for myself? So I've just given you a ton of information. Let me pause. And Christopher, are there any questions in the chat?
So we actually had someone who did all the work to find the Q&A in Google. Rather than just typing in the chat, they went over to the Q&A, which I was like, oh, I have a dot. What's that for? So I was impressed. So Tiffany Brown, and I don't know Tiffany. So Tiffany, thank you for being like, you actually went through the proper channels to do the Q&A. So it's kind of a long one. So here, and it's not going to be an easy one, Mazi. Look at Mazi with that Auburn mug. We'll have to talk about that later. Rather than detaching when someone projects or offloads their feelings onto us, what would you recommend to do to avoid conflict and disrupting the workplace environment? And then she goes on to say, especially when you see it clearly is not a good time to discuss where their active hostility is coming from at the time.
Okay.
You got all that?
I think so. So it sounds like somebody's starting something and it's not a good time to have this conversation for whatever reason. Either the person's too hot, or it's not the right context, or maybe there's just literally not time to have the conversation. So I think and hopefully this is going to answer your question. I think in those situations, what we can do is we can lead with acknowledgement, lead with empathy, and then make the request. Excuse me. I see that you have a lot of thoughts and some feelings around this topic, and I see that it's very important to you that we discuss it, and I want to discuss it with you. However, I would like to discuss it at another time. I think that might be best for me, for everyone. Can we discuss it tomorrow at blah, blah? And so kind of the formula that you're wanting to use there is acknowledge how they're feeling, acknowledge what you perceive. So kind of some reflective listening, if you will. And then to make the request, and to make the request of discussing it at another time, but make sure that you follow up that request with a suggested time. That's a really important part. Like anytime that because with any sort of conversation, whether it's personal or professional, there gets to be a point when somebody can become flooded. That's the term. But really they're falling into fight or flight response. And so they're not going to think clearly. Their brain's gone offline. You're a tiger to them. They're going to destroy you, right? And so when we get in that mindset, there are just never productive conversations. And so we do have to take a time out. So anytime that you are requesting a timeout from someone on a conversation, you always want to offer a suggestion of when you can circle back. Because if you request a timeout, but you don't offer and we can continue talking about this tomorrow or Wednesday or whenever, then it can trigger like abandonment. It can feel like abandonment. It can feel like you're just cutting. So we want to acknowledge that we see what the person is feeling. We see that this is important to them. Make the request of another time to speak, and then offer when that time can be. Hopefully that somewhat helps.
Okay, Mazi. So I've got one other question, and it's tough because I want to answer it myself, but I'm going to let you, because you're the expert here. But I have my opinion on it.
Okay.
I always can count on Scott to give us a good question. So he says he's read once that one can forgive ... but not forget. And then he says, "Is that healthy?" And I hope that you say yes, Mazi. So go ahead.
Oh yeah. Our brains were created for memory for a reason, right? And memory is as much a part of our survival mechanism as, the fight or flight response, because memory helps us remember that the stove was hot. And so maybe I don't need to touch the stove again, right? And so, yes, we can forgive. And oh my goodness, I love to talk about forgiveness. I could just go off on a whole tangent about forgiveness, because there are so many myths and misteachings about forgiveness. But we can forgive, but no, we don't forget, because the memory informs our decisions moving forward in the relationship. The memory informs the boundaries that we need to set. The memories inform maybe the changes we need to make within ourselves, within our own individual lives. The memories inform the requests that we need from this person in order for them to build trust back into the relationship. So the memories are important, but forgiveness helps us find freedom from the sting of the memory, so that the memory becomes somewhat objective in our mind, and it's no longer live, if that makes sense. But Christopher, I'd love to hear what you have to say also.
I think that that's lovely. And even we have Tiffany she says that's excellent advice. So I grew up in the South in a very conservative Christian environment, and I was always taught that you had to forgive and forget. But recently, and maybe Mazi, it was Brene, but I'm not sure if it was Brene or maybe some of the teachings that I've heard recently that really outline that the whole forget thing is incorrect and not possible, and God doesn't expect us to forget, because that's your protection. And I think, especially during COVID for me, and this, even though this is a leadership topic, it is still about mental health as well. Like, you have to build boundaries, and if you forget stuff, you wouldn't build those boundaries. So your boundaries are important, and it's very important. I think forgiving someone is the way to clean out your own heart and to put joy into your heart, but you can't necessarily forget, because that's your learning mechanism. So yes, I should have known. You'd have been right there with me, Mazi. So thank you.
Yes, I completely agree with everything that you said. The forgetting is how we get into trouble. Forgetting is how we end up staying in relationships, whether personal or professional, longer than we need to. So so yes, we want to remember. Any other questions before I dive in?
That looks like it for right now.
Okay, so we've talked about how to detach, but remember, the reason we want to detach is so that we can helpfully engage. We can engage from a place of health. We don't detach so we can just float off on our own and be an island unto ourselves and just stay in our office and not interact with anyone. We want to detach so we can engage. So what is the pathway, if you will, between detachment and engagement? And that pathway is vulnerability. And so Brene Brown defines vulnerability as risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And the way that I like to think about vulnerability, it has certainly become a buzzword over the past 5 to 7 years. We hear about it a lot. There are, again, a lot of misconceptions about vulnerability. For a lot of us, we hear vulnerability and we think, oh my goodness, are you just wanting me to air my dirty laundry and just share all my stuff at work? No, I'm really not wanting you to do that. And no one, no one wants you to do that. You know, vulnerability is not just like airing our story. Vulnerability is multifaceted. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But vulnerability is really the key to everything. You know, if we want to make changes in our life, it's going to require us to be vulnerable, because a change is risky, it's uncertain, and it's emotionally exposing. If we want to change jobs, it's going to require us to be vulnerable, because changing jobs is risky, uncertain, and emotionally exposing. If we want to have hard conversations, if we want to stand up for change in our world, if we want to get out of a bad relationship, if we want to start dating again, everything comes back to vulnerability. And so it's really important to understand what vulnerability looks like in your life. And it is so helpful to understand what vulnerability looks like in the workplace, because we want to have healthy, functional workplace environments, and integrating vulnerability is really, really key to that. So for a lot of people, they will often say, well, then what does vulnerability look like in the workplace? Are you wanting me to cry with my team? Again, no, that's not what we're wanting you to do. And so this is from Dare to Lead. Christopher told me that some of y'all have read it together, but this is, oh, I'm on the wrong page. This is a passage where Brene gives an example of what vulnerability in the workplace sounds like. And I think it's so helpful. So I'm just going to read. During a time of difficult change and uncertainty, daring leaders might sit with their teams and say, these changes are coming in hard and fast, and I know there's a lot of anxiety. I'm feeling it too, and it's hard to work through. It's hard to not take it home. It's hard to not worry, and it's easy to want to look for someone to blame. I will share everything I can about the changes with you as soon as I can. I want to spend the next 45 minutes rumbling on how we're all managing these changes. Specifically, what does support from me look like? What questions can I try to answer? Are there any stories you want to check out with me? And any other questions you have? I'm asking everyone to stay connected and lean into each other during this churn so we can really rumble with what's going on. In the midst of all of this, we still need to produce work that makes us proud. Let's each write down one thing we need from this group in order to feel okay sharing and asking questions, and one thing that will get in the way. And so you see in this example, the leader, the supervisor, is acknowledging everyone's feelings, acknowledging his or her own feelings, and then also giving this open invitation for discussion, and then also making the request that we lean in to the hard. So again, vulnerability in the workplace does not mean we let it all hang out, sharing every feeling and everything that's going on in our lives. But it is about leaning into the hard stuff. It is filtering every decision through the lens of courage or comfort. If I avoid offering this suggestion, is that courage or comfort? If I delay giving this team member feedback that he needs to hear, hoping that the problem will just magically work itself out, is that choosing courage or comfort? If I react defensively and tell someone why their feedback is completely off base and they need to look at themselves, is that courage or is that comfort? So vulnerability in the workplace looks like this. It looks like listening when you really want to correct someone. It looks like refraining from gossip regarding a team member instead of confronting them directly. It looks like giving empathy rather than immediately jumping to problem solving, which is something that I think leaders and supervisors really have to be mindful of. You know, you hear a team member complaining about something or just sharing something, and you know, it kicks in that like, oh, I got to solve this problem. Somebody's unhappy, somebody's worried about something, and you jump into that problem solving. But really what we have to remember is that most people want to be heard. They don't want to be fixed. And there will be an opportunity to problem solve, but you will never go wrong with leading with empathy, letting empathy being the first, second, and third thing out of your mouth. Vulnerability looks like practicing your own self-awareness as a leader when you are starting to notice, for example, that you're judging everyone around you. That is often indicative that you are judging yourself. You're feeling insecure somewhere in your own life. So developing self-awareness in that way. Vulnerability is saying what everyone else is too intimidated to say. It's acknowledging your mistakes, taking ownership of your part. It's not blaming, jumping to that blame, bouncing that hurt. It's looking at, okay, well, what's my part? So all of this is what engagement at work looks like. You are willing to take the risk of leaning in, of being vulnerable. You are willing to choose the courageous path over the comfortable path. So with this mindset of vulnerability, I wanted to leave you with 5 characteristics of what engaged leaders, engaged team members look like. Just 5 characteristics. So the first, an engaged leader is clear. Again, this is another Brenéism, but clear is kind. Clear communication is kind. You will never go wrong with clear communication. So what is clear communication? What do I mean by that? Giving clear expectations, giving clear reasons, giving clear feedback, saying I don't know if you don't know, leaving room for discussions and questions and not feeling threatened by someone's discussions and questions. You know, for some of us, the way we're wired, our personality, if someone asks questions, we feel that they're questioning us. We feel that they're questioning our authority or our decision making. But for a lot of people, how they process information is through question and answer. They're not questioning your judgment. They take in information by asking questions, you know. So clear is kind. We are often unclear in communicating our expectations and directions, and we're often unclear because we don't want to offend someone, or we don't want to seem too controlling, or we don't want to seem too micromanaging. But then when they do it X and we wanted it Y, then we got an issue on our hands. And if we had just been clear from the get-go, we would have avoided, you know, the possible conflict. Whenever I interview, I have a counseling center that I run, and whenever I interview someone, I have a very long interview process for my my counseling center. I mean, there are multiple stages. You would think that this poor person is interviewing for a Fortune 500 company. And I tell them at the beginning of the interview process, like, it is a lengthy interview process. There are lots of stages, but I just want everyone to be clear on mutual expectations, because I don't have time to date and break up, you know? And so clear is kind. Being clear, being honest, and leaning into the hard, that is vulnerability. And so we want to, when we talk about being a vulnerable leader, that's what we're talking about. We mentioned conflict earlier, but engaged leaders can handle conflict because they know that anger does not mean disconnection. This goes back to clear communication. And engaged leaders can communicate clearly, even if it becomes a little bit tense, because they are coming at it from the posture of, I want to learn and I want to understand. Engaged leaders can make hard decisions and make necessary changes, again, without their worth and their sense of identity being tied to if everyone is happy with them or not. The next one, an engaged leader expresses appreciation and gratitude and celebrates achievement. This one is so important. And especially right now during COVID, this is a wonderful way that you can model this engagement for your team, and you can really pour into your team. When we express appreciation and gratitude, it is significant for a number of reasons. One, it's showing that we're paying attention. Like it is truly showing that we're engaged, we're present, and we're paying attention. We are taking notice of what others are doing, and we are taking the vulnerable step of saying thank you. And it's interesting that I say that saying thank you is vulnerable, but anytime we show gratitude or appreciation, it is vulnerable, because we are putting someone ahead of ourselves. We are putting someone ahead of us, and we are not falling into that scarcity mindset that if I put someone ahead, I might lose out. So we want to practice gratitude and appreciation. We also want to remember that recognition leads to retention. People want to be recognized. Now, not everyone wants to be publicly recognized in a room full of 100 people, but people want to be recognized for what they're doing. It is an easy, simple way to pour into someone. And particularly right now, when we are so weary, your staff is so worn out, and you are so worn out, it is a simple thing to just maybe even set a goal for yourself that each week I'm going to send one email to a staff member thanking them for something that they did this week, even if they were supposed to do it. I'm not talking about above and beyond, even if they're just kind of doing their job. Just, it's a way of saying, I notice, I appreciate, I'm grateful, thank you. It's also important to celebrate, right? To celebrate your own personal milestones, to celebrate your staff's milestones. And some leaders can really struggle with celebration because they mistakenly believe, ooh, if I start to celebrate, if I praise too much, people are going to get lazy, people are going to get complacent, and they're going to stop working hard. But again, that's a myth. And so celebration shows that we are paying attention. When we don't express appreciation, when we don't express gratitude, when we don't celebrate, that is when we start to let scarcity, the nothing is ever good enough mindset, that's when we start to let scarcity call the shots. And a scarcity environment is demotivating, and it does not facilitate collaboration. So we want to express gratitude, appreciation, and celebration. An engaged leader comes down from grandiosity and comes up from shame. So let me unpack what I mean by that. When we lead or when we live from the one-up position, our goal is control and power. Our goal is not collaboration. And this leads to leaders having very tunnel vision about their own perspective, about what they want, and they end up having a lack of empathy for other people's experience. This type of one-up position leads to a lot of micromanaging, which, as we all know, micromanaging really inhibits a team member's sense of ownership, their buy-in, their creativity, their incentive to pour into the team, into the role. Also, this one-up position can lead to blaming can lead to belittling and any sort of other communication tactic that keeps that hierarchy, that unhealthy hierarchy in place. We can also be stuck in the one down, the shame position, which is what we've talked about a lot today, of feeling not good enough. We're afraid of rocking the boat. We're afraid of making somebody mad, and we doubt our ability, and we don't lean into the hard like we need to. So we want to come down from grandiosity. We want to come down from that one-up position. We want to come up from shame, and we want to have what's known as the same as mentality. So we are equals, even though I know with org charts you're not necessarily equals, but we're equals in the sense that our power isn't derived from being better than someone. Our power isn't derived from being over someone. We are comfortable answering questions. We're comfortable giving the reasons behind our decisions. We're comfortable explaining ourselves, and we're comfortable when someone asks for clarification about what is going on. Next, engaged leaders are curious. Again, this word curious comes up again. It's just such an important posture to take in our lives. When we aren't curious about ourselves, when we aren't curious about other people, that is often an indicator that shame, the feeling of not being good enough, it is having too much power in the situation. A lack of curiosity by a leader really creates a stifling environment. These leaders take up all the space. No one feels encouraged to speak up or offer anything because that leader just shuts everybody down. They have the answer, they have the solution, they have the opinion, they have the plan. Uncurious leaders often hoard information, they hoard airtime, they hoard credit. So we want to embrace this posture of learning, this posture of curiosity. Tell me more about that. I'd love to understand to a greater degree where you're coming from. Can you expand on that? What would support from me look like right now? How can I best support you right now as we are moving through COVID? It is being curious about the other person. And then lastly, an engaged leader manages with compassionate accountability instead of shame. Most leaders do not understand shame and how shame can creep into a management style, how shame can creep into a system. So we want to get clear on what shame looks like in a system. Shame looks like bullying, gaslighting, attacking someone's personhood, harassment, secret keeping, blaming, perfectionism, unspoken rules, gossiping, comparing, teasing, sarcasm, and correlating production with worth. Shame is never a motivator. And if your management style is shame, your team members are not going to be motivated. They are going to feel beaten down. They are going to feel criticized. They are going to feel nitpicked. Shame is never, ever a motivator. And shame in the form of blaming, we often see that in the workplace, creates a sense of unsafety in the environment because you don't know when you're going to be the one who's blamed. And so, when we work for a blaming supervisor, our tendency is to want to stay small, to stay silent. Let me fly under the radar because I don't want to be picked on next. And so it's important as leaders to understand how shame might be manifesting in your system, how it gets triggered, how it impacts the system. And we want to move from shame management to what's known as compassionate accountability. We want to learn how someone on our team likes to receive feedback. And that's a good question to ask somebody. How do you like to receive feedback? Does it work better for you if I give you your evaluation, let you read over it, and then set up a time to meet? Does it work better for you if we immediately talk about it and I hand it to you right then? We want to practice curiosity about this other person's viewpoint. Someone is unhappy on the team. Someone feels overworked, underwhelmed. You want to be curious about their perspective on this, and you want to address their behavior, not their personhood. So we want to use language that talks about their actions, not about their personality or their personhood. So before I wrap us up, any questions, anything that I can clarify or expand on from all of what I just shared?
Mazi, we do have a couple questions. One is can you give too much praise, so much that it seems insincere even when it's not?
Well, I would say that kind of depends on the person receiving the praise, because I think for some people, too much praise, they will feel like you're not being sincere. But for some people, they kind of thrive off of positivity and celebration. Like, again, I'm going back to the Enneagram. Like, I think a 7 would just love to have praise all the time, and a 3 would love to have praise all the time. But like a 5, an 8 might be a little skeptical. And so then I think, again, it goes back to curiosity. It's being curious enough to know individually how your team members need and want to be led, because some are going to need more praise, more acknowledgement than others. Some are going to appreciate the email that you send or even a handwritten note, and some are going to appreciate being recognized in the all team meeting. And so managing people how they need and want to be managed.
Amazing. I have to just say that I love your response, because Lord, I have been at GPLS so long now, I don't remember ever working anywhere else, but I do remember I used to change jobs every year and a half. And one question they would always ask is, what's the best kind of supervisor to have? And I would always say, the worst is a micromanager, the best is a macro. And I was like, I don't believe that anymore. I believe just what you said. And this is the hardest part about being a supervisor, is that you have to know each individual that you're supervising, and you have to supervise to their needs and their strengths and their weaknesses. And that's hard.
Yeah.
But it's what you have to do. So, okay, we got one more question.
Okay.
How do you navigate in an environment where your leadership is too busy to engage? It's more of a priority for you to engage than the leader's priority.
Yes. And so I'm sure that, well, of course, that happens a lot. And that is a situation where hopefully someone from the team will take the courageous and vulnerable step to meet with leadership and to say, we need more from you. And this might be where, HR comes in. But we need more from you. We need more face time. We need more air time. We need more staff meetings. We just need more from you, because that leader has gotten off balanced, where they are so in the job that they aren't able to do the job, or whatever that phrase is. I may have messed that up. Because, the leader, yes, the leader has a lot of job responsibilities, but part of being the responsibility of a leader is to pour into and cultivate this team. And so someone has to bring that awareness to them that they've gotten a little off kilter, that they aren't watering the garden, so to speak, but giving them that feedback. Because it goes back to what we were saying. If you don't lean into the hard and avoid giving feedback, then people don't know, and that doesn't serve the system.
And I'm of the opinion is that if you have a leader who you can't be vulnerable enough, and I'm so thankful to have a supervisor that when I want to have a hard conversation, I just have it with her, and she allows me to do that. It's so important. So if you can't do that, it might be time to assess, and for you to be vulnerable, to go somewhere else and look for that new opportunity. So I think that's all the questions we have, Mazi. Just lots of comments about learning a lot here.
Great. Well, just in conclusion, as we all know, there will always be critics. Everybody's always going to have an opinion. And our responsibility in any role is to learn to detach from those critics and to detach our worth from what other people think of us. And when we are detached and differentiated, that is when we will be able to engage and to effectively lead. That's when we'll be able to lean into vulnerability, choose courage over comfort, choose clear over false peace, and lead with empathy and curiosity. So thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate on an afternoon that you took time to join this call and to dig into this topic. I really, really appreciate your time. If I can ever be of service to you, if you have any follow-up questions from today, if you ever want a book recommendation, anything like that, please feel free to email me at mazirobinson.com.